that, didn't you? It's not inflatable. Basically, what I've picked up in the past 20 minutes is I talk to myself, so I'm completely mental, and I lie to myself, so I'm a liar, basically. So that's I was feeling good about myself till I came in, but never mind. It's going to be a long trip home to Norfolk. So basically, I want to say, thank you very much to Dale there. That was a nice intro for me. Give me way too much credit. You're about to be massively disappointed, but we'll see. They're about to lock the door, so you've got no option but to stay the next 45 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover sort of a brief period in my life in the military, and what I'm going to try and do is relate some of the things I've picked up, the thought process behind it, and I'm going to merge seamlessly, we hope, the military context into what happened to me, and then how that sort of spurred me on to sort of get back to myself after I got injured in Afghanistan, which I'll sort of cover. I'll try and keep it light. Unfortunately for you guys, I'm very sarcastic and very dry, so if you don't laugh at my jokes, I won't take it too hard, to be quite honest, because I'll be laughing myself, so that's fine. All right, cheers, mate. Thanks. That's I paid him earlier, so yeah. So I'm just going to crack on, and then I think we're going to have a Q&A session afterwards, and just to put it out there that so far as yet, I've never been offended. That's not like a obligation there to try and offend me, but I've never been offended yet. I've done talks in schools to you name it, and so far the best question I've had is by an 8-year-old child who came up to me, kicked my leg and said, well, how many Germans did you kill then? History's gone down the pan in school, I'll be honest. He was disappointed when I said none and just walked off, so I was like, cheers. So we'll crack on. So just by way of a couple of slides, I'm just going to cover a few sort of topics about sort of leadership. I spent 14 years in total, including the time I was injured in the military. And I guess like any organisation, civilian or military, I don't know if there's any ex-military people in the audience, you go in sort of on the rank structures at a base level, and then dependent on your sort of performance really, you will then progress through the ranks. So you will be put up for promotion by your sort of your heads, if that makes sense, or the people in charge of you. Then you'll go through a selection process, and it's like anything really, any selection process. Everything you learn is out of a book, but you try and apply everything you do to experience. So you gain experience on operations, but then when you go to any sort of selection course, you're trying to apply, unfortunately, what you've learned out of a book. The military being what it is, everything is obviously about 20-30 years behind, just as it is, but it's to get to a standard and hopefully show that you've got what it takes to be a commander when it counts. And for myself, I was promoted to corporal, and I went through a sort of selection process there. But one thing that I did do from the day that I entered the military, I joined at 19, was that all the commanders that I had set a huge example and had a big impact. I guess you guys could relate that to you guys starting work. You could put it to your first boss or whoever that may be. They have a profound impact on you. If they're bad, you're thinking, well, when I get in that position, I'm not going to be like that. When they're good, you think, yeah, I'll take a little bit of that and I'll apply that to how I do things. And that's kind of what I did. I'm not saying it made me Winston Churchill, far from it, but at the end of the day, I kind of took these little things and tried to apply it as best I could. So that's where I got through the individual experiences. And plus, once you're given the responsibility of having men under your command, whether it be on operations or on exercise, you're responsible for those guys, in a 360-degree fashion, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. Realistic, there is a way in the military that you go from being a civilian to being in the military, and then depending on how long you spend in the military, you go back to being a civilian. When you're in the military, you're very much a sort of single entity. You look down, I hate to say it because I'm surrounded here, but you look down on the civilians and you think, well, we're in the military, we do this, we do that, and we do the next thing. And actually, it probably sounds a negative here, but it's actually quite a positive. You need guys to think like that. You need to think that they're a little bit above, a little bit fitter, a little bit more motivated and all the rest of it, because they need that, and it is quite an important sort of cornerstone for the guys. So physically and mentally, they need to have that sort of motivation, and that was quite a big a big thing I used to try and instill, and I'll cover how I used to do that. Being responsible on operations and sort of domestic, that covers like quite a wide variety. Even as a corporal, being responsible for eight guys, you have all sorts of people joining the military. There's no rule book. You'll get guys pass an entrance test, and they come into the military, do their basic training, and they'll come to your unit. From past experience, I've had guys from inner city Manchester, that have been literally living on the streets, believe it or not. They've had no parents and all the rest of it. They'll get through the selection process, and then you're responsible for them. And you'll find that they're very, very loyal and very motivated, and actually probably one of the best guys you've got. Flip it to the other end, you might have a guy who joins at 17, 18-year-old, and he's a spoiled brat. Trying to motivate that kid is an absolute nightmare, and it's like herding cats. It's an absolute nightmare. But you use the whole carrot and stick method, don't you? But enough about that. But basically, you can have a broad spectrum of people, and what you've got to try and do is reach those people as best you can, and to lay any sort of mystery or any sort of like terrible story to rest. I will be quite honest with you. At times in the military, there were one-way conversations and a bit of shouting, but I'll be quite honest with you. I'm not the kind of guy to hug trees and join hands and skip around the room, but I never found shouting got the best out of people. There's always another way to motivate people, and that's what I found, especially on operations, and I'll cover that a little bit more. And at the bottom, something that stood me in good stead that I found as a commander was definitely sarcasm and a sense of humour. In the UK, you might get to, say, a typical Monday morning when all your blokes, average age 20-year-old, they've been out in the town all weekend doing, I hate to think, who knows what, and you come in on the Monday morning, first parade. Everyone had a good weekend yet? Anything I need to be aware of? No. 2 minutes in your office, 8:30 in the morning, you get a phone call from the police. We arrested 2 of your guys at the weekend, running around Cardiff City dressed as women, doing who knows what, and you're like, brilliant, nice one, cheers. And that's the start of your day. You've not even started work yet, so it's just an absolute nightmare. So you've got a broad spectrum of everything, but then go on operations. Those guys that have caused you problems in the UK, again, you've got to have them, doing exactly what you need on operations, and it's a very different process of how we did it. What I'm going to do is go into like a slight story, and then hopefully you'll see how sort of things progressed. As a corporal in 2006, I was working on a unit that was doing a lot of reconnaissance out in Afghanistan. And what it was, for if you went back in sort of time to 2006, before all the sort of military went out there, they had like sort of small units going out and just getting local atmospherics. But since 2001, what they were trying to do was uplift a lot of the drugs and get a lot of the drugs out of the country. So they were doing a lot of hits on all these sort of opium places and trying to get them out of there. My job as a corporal was looking after 7 guys, so 8 of us in total. I was working on a unit where there were 3 sections, so 3 lots of 8 people, if that makes sense. And we were working to one boss, and he would sort of call the shots. My job on a daily basis was working as a QRF, so you had to be massively reactive, which is quite hard, as anyone knows in their business. It's better to be proactive than reactive, isn't it? But our job was to be massively reactive. You would never know what was coming down the pipeline. It might be that, unfortunately, there's an injured civilian at the gate with a broken leg. Can you go and sort it out? Or in this case, there was a downed helicopter up in the Hindu Kush, up in the mountains, up in Afghan, and it had about £8 million worth of raw opium on it. So basically our job was to go up. There was no one injured on this aircraft when it crashed. It was basically flying off from where it picked up all the drugs from, clipped the side of this mountain, one of the rotors, and it downed. All the guys were all right. There was only a few guys on it. I think there was like 6 personnel on it, not counting the 2 pilots. We got a call that we were going to have to get in a helicopter in 5 minutes' time, and we were going to have to go up there, and we were going to have to protect these guys while they either work out if they're going to blow up the aircraft with this £8 million worth of drugs, or whether they're going to work out a way to undersling it under a helicopter and get it out of there. So two things there. You're working on minimal information. You know your guys. You guys know their drills, and you're well rehearsed, but you don't know what's going to be on the ground when you get there. So quite confusing. And actually, what Dale said there about working under pressure, you know, you try and convince yourself, yeah, it'll be fine, we know what we're doing. But it's like anything, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Just as it's going to take place in a second, about a kilometre from where the aircraft went down, where they got this stuff, there's a couple of hundred civilians that aren't too impressed because they've been growing this opium for a few months and it's just about to be taken away from them. A lot of money out of their system. I'll be honest, we were about as popular as a brown thing in a punch bowl, you know, not too popular to be quite honest. And then we got satellite sort of footage from our headquarters saying that there was roughly 100 Taliban fighters coming over the mountains in vehicles, all right, and they were hell-bent on stopping us from doing what we're doing. So it was 30 guys with some guys in a helicopter going up there to work out what we were going to do. What we did was we went in and we provided a big cordon, protective cordon. Now again, you're getting out there, there's no information, you just know possibly there's 100 guys going to turn up expecting a bit of a bun fight. We don't want to be there because you want to get off the ground as quick as you can and you're thinking, crikey, you know, what we're going to do. I was 27, my average age of a guy in my section was 19-year-old. And they're looking at you and I think it goes to show that actually, you know, command is one of the loneliest places in the world when you've got 8 faces looking at you saying, hey Dunk, what are we going to do if these guys come at us? And you're thinking, not actually quite sure to be quite honest, but you're not going to turn around and say that. You've got to put on that, not a facade, but you've got to kind of dig into those things that you've had in the past and think, well, we've just got to do our best here and get on with it. And that's unfortunately what we had to do. Just to sort of bring it to life, you know, I'm going to show you the footage of what we did, but as the guys are coming over the mountain, believe it or not, in the vehicles, wanting to have a bit of a bun fight with us, they managed to quickly blow up the helicopter. We managed to get on the helicopters and get out of there. So I'll play that now just to show what happened. And when the helicopter went off, this here, these walls, this is sort of where we put in our defensive position. It's actually just off here. Probably about 30, 40 feet away from the helicopter when it went off, so it was a bit of a loud bang. I wasn't actually expecting it to be quite honest. Probably why I'm deaf now. But we were kind of waiting for this bang, and then it was a case to get out of there as quick as we could. So here we go.
This is a demonstration of flip format.
And that's about it. That was there should be a little bit more. Basically, I don't think it's downloaded, but just to let you know what happened, we had about 16 guys surrounding that area because it was quite sensitive equipment, and what they wanted to do was make sure the drugs had all basically caught fire and all the rest of it. We had about 200 civilians run, 8 of us basically, and we had to kind of stop them as best they could because they wanted to ransack the aircraft. While that's happening, if you imagine how hard it is to control sort of a few guys on the ground whilst coordinating 100 civilians and get on a helicopter because you want to get out of there because there's guys coming over the mountain. It's quite a high pressure environment for anyone to sort of work in, and it was actually, for me, it was a big eye opener. It was actually one of the only times, or the first time, that I've been in that environment where I thought, crikey, this is going to go wrong big time. But luckily, you know, it didn't. And as we were flying out, believe it or not, they flew us over one of the mountains and we could just see the vehicles coming with all these blokes in it, so we were quite lucky to get out of there. But that was one of the first things. One of the few things I picked up from that as role of a leader was in any command course that we did in the military, they have acronyms for everything in the military, all right, for everything. You know, KISS being the biggest one, keep it simple, stupid. You know, we keep it simple because you're stupid, so you're like, yeah, cheers for that, thanks. But, you know, other ones, as a commander, you know, CMAID, the things that you need to be an effective commander: confidence, manner, attitude, diligence, and enthusiasm. There's about 1 million of these things. I don't know who thinks them up, but it certainly wasn't me. But the one thing that we picked out of that, or one thing I always picked up out of any sort of training course that we did was, you know, it's great to try and purvey these things. It's great to try and put these things out there, but it didn't work for me. For me to stand in front of 30 blokes and shout and bawl as you think that you're supposed to, it didn't work. So being myself, so speaking to people basically as I would like to be approached and spoken to myself, was actually way more effective. And you actually get a lot more feedback that way from the guys. You know, guys will generally come and tell you what's happening with them, and generally speaking, on a 9 to 5 day week in the UK, you'll get more out of them, and it was more effective on operations for sure. Training with the guys, I did find out, as I'll go on to a little bit, on operations, training one up was a big thing. You know, you've probably done it in your own businesses. Your boss has a day off, who's going to fill in for him? It was a big thing in the military. It wasn't a case of having a day off. Usually it was someone's been injured, or unfortunately someone's been killed, who's going to take over, and I'll go into one of the vignettes in a minute, but that's what happened to me. In fact, it happened twice on the one tour within about a fortnight, and I was like, you know, like a rabbit in the headlights. But you know, that's why we sort of train one up, and that's one thing we did on exercise, sort of big time, to so the guys have confidence that if it does happen, you know, you can carry on as best you can. And that was again one thing that I was always made to do as a young lad, as a sort of young private, and it helped me out massively. Setting a firm example, just to sort of cover that in broad brush. I also had an example set to me, and the military has its own set of sort of values and standards, and people will either take that on or they won't. You know, you're not going to get everyone that's going to toe the line, but I always had it as a clear defined angle that when guys come to me on my section, my platoon, or on my unit, that they massively toed the line, and I kept the standards up as best I could at all times. You know, the one time that you go back at it is the one time that guys know they can get away with it and standards slip. And that's fine if you're just sort of going to lose a bit of face. That's a bit of embarrassment. But when that happens on operations, it's a big deal. You know, if guys cut corners and all the rest of it, lives are at stake, and it's a bit of a problem then. Mentoring. I was always mentored sort of through my career by watching other guys, how they did things. And I don't just mean a sort of higher up level. I would watch guys in my peer group, or in fact other guys that are coming through the ranks, see how they would do things, because at the end of the day, just because you're a commander doesn't mean you know everything. You know, if you can't be approached and told how to do something a bit more effectively, you're not much of a commander at all, I don't think. So it was important to also to mentor people, but to be mentored as well by all. Leading from the front, that was more sort of obvious on operations, but again, which I'll come on to in a minute, the way that you can replicate that for operations, the way you can get guys into that sort of mindset, is when you go on exercise in the UK or abroad. We go on exercise for quite a long period of time, and that's before you go on operations, and it's when you fine-tune the guys. You know, you see them under a sort of controlled stress environment, and again they see you under a controlled stress environment, so they can get a bit of confidence in you, and likewise you get a bit of confidence that if something happens, they're going to produce the goods. You know, it's good to have drills set in place, but you know, like it says many times, no plan will survive contact with enemies. So you can train and train and train, guaranteed. As soon as you leave camp to do something, the wheels fall off your wagon and you think, right, well, we're walking from here now. That wasn't in the plan. And it happens time and time again in everyone's walk of life, really. When I'm saying don't be afraid, I don't mean I'm as hard as nails, I wasn't afraid. What I mean is it's to embrace things. Many times on operations, things would happen and it was embrace change. Don't be afraid of the change. You know, you've just got to kind of get in there. And 9 times out of 10, if we sort of dived into the situation without worrying about it too much, just because we trained, but not specifically for that one thing, it was a case of just get on with it. And believe it or not, 9 times out of 10, things would happen at a more effective end than any other time. And then being approachable, which again I'll cover. Some of the younger lads are intimidated going on operations for the first time if you put them in sort of, if you put yourself in their place. 19-year-old lad does an exercise, does a bit of training, he's confident and all the rest of it, lands in Afghanistan or Iraq for the first time, and it's like, right, get your kit on, we're going straight out on operations, we're not going to be back here for 6 weeks. Happy with that? He's going to look at you like, I hope you're talking Swahili here, you know, what you're talking about. You know, you're not going to get much sort of confidence from that guy. So you need to be approachable, you need to be open to what he's saying. Some of the guys, when we got out there, they weren't ready, so you had to work around that, because you're putting them in a position where you're not going to get the best from them, and in fact, it's going to go the other way. You know, bad things will happen when you put underconfident people in a position where they're going to be faced with sort of, you know, testing time, so to speak. This is one way. On the unit I was on, it was an airborne unit. For those that don't know what that means, you go through a selection process, and your job basically means that, you know, should it be required, you would parachute out of an aircraft and you would land, and then that's your delivery method of getting to work. It's no different from arriving in a tank or arriving in a vehicle. It's just another way of doing it. The reason that we practice it, the chances of it happening in a war zone or anything like that, probably 1,000,000 to 1 unless you're in the American forces. But it's a really good training tool. The stress of sorting yourself out for a parachute jump, it takes about, well, they reckon it's about 8 to 10 hours stress on your body, even though it only takes an hour to actually get up in an aircraft and do it. So it's a really good training tool for the guys, believe it or not. And it puts them through stress, and controlled stress is really, really effective for the blokes, especially when they go out to places like Afghanistan on operations where they're going to be put in a stressful environment. You know, the stress that they're going through at that time might not be something they've gone through before, but their body and their mind and all the rest of it, it's been engaged in stress in the past. So it's important that they can tie in with that, and it might not be the same, but they can actually, you know, put that sort of feeling and all the rest of it to good use. So just a little bit of footage on again, leading by example. You know, the boss and myself, we would always be the first out, because the idea being that you always follow your commanders, and the commander should always be the first out the door, no matter what. Just to tie like another point I was thinking there, and was the whole one-up thing that I was talking about before. More on exercise really than operations, because it tends to happen on exercise. When you do parachute jump, you're guaranteed that somebody will break an ankle, break a leg, whatever. I'm not obviously selling your parachute in there, by the way, but you know, get insurance. You know, but what I would say is the guys need to be in that mindset that if there's high winds, they get dropped off a fair old way from the unit. They've got to be self-sufficient. They've got to think for themselves, you know. But that's just how they get to work. That's just how they're getting to the ground. How they get to then the start of the exercise, the start line of the battle or whatever, it's down to them to think about that. And if you treat the guys like they're a number, like they're a mushroom, so they're kept in the dark and fed on the brown stuff, you know, they're going to act accordingly. If you give them the freedom to think, oh yeah, I know where I am, I've got a map, I know where we're going, I know what we're doing. You know, if they're fully briefed with as much information and as much freedom to think as possible, definitely, you know, you get the best results out of them. That's how I was treated, and again, that's how I then treat the young lads coming through, because it got sort of better results every single time. Just to sort of talk about Iraq 2007, we were working up in Baghdad. That's my unit there. We had about 30 of us working there in support of some of the other units up there, and we went up there for 9 months, so quite a long old period of time really. And it was quite a testing place working in Baghdad. You know, it's quite a dodgy old place, and we did quite a big sort of package for training. So we were really well rehearsed in sort of exercises and all the rest of it, and every man knew their job. The first week I was there, my sergeant, so I was a corporal at the time, I was in charge of a stick of 4 guys, so 3 guys and myself, so easy. When you've been looking after 8 guys, it's a piece of cake, isn't it? But you're looking after sort of a group of 4 people, easy. I was looking forward to a nice testing tour, but I was in my comfort zone massively, to be quite honest with you, and I thought, brilliant. First week I was there, my sergeant, basically he was injured. I think literally as we hit the 1 week mark, he was injured, and they looked for the most senior corporal, which lucky me, you know, born lucky. They you know, they said, right, guess what, you're now stepping into the sergeant's job. So you're like, oh great. So I'm now responsible for 30 guys, the welfare, operations, and all the rest of it. So taking them out on the ground every night and looking after them every day, sending them on sort of an R&R, and dealing with the sort of Jeremy Kyle stroke dramas that they have in their lives that, that young people have. It was just an absolute, it was an eye-opener, to be quite honest with you, because I wasn't prepared for it. But again, because we'd worked one up and I knew roughly what the sergeant's job was, I thought, yeah, all right, we'll get used to it. I don't know if it's like a flawed position, I don't know in that platoon, but a couple of weeks later they thought, right, we'll get an actual, proper sergeant out from the UK to come in, and you can go back to your corporal's role. He was out about 2 weeks, he fell out of a helicopter, broke his leg, and guess what? Muggins back in the frame again, happy with that. I wasn't getting paid for it, by the way, but hey, we'll leave that. And it was back into the sergeant's role. And my boss, because we were working to my boss, he had to go back to the UK for a week. The flights were delayed and there was massive problems, and then he had dramas back in the UK, so he wasn't there. So I had to step up to now be the boss of that unit. So I was now a corporal stroke sergeant stroke officer. I was wearing like 3 hats at one time, and they're massive amounts of stress. But do you know what? Because I delegated and I literally had to have all the guys helping me out, and we'd sort of trained for it, it worked out, even in a high pressure environment when every single night we were up against it, and it was quite intense. It did work out all right, and it was only due to the blokes being so good and me unwillingly at first delegating, because no one likes to give up the train set, do they? Everyone's like that in business, aren't they? No one likes to give up. This is mine. You're not taking any of the kudos for this. I had to. There wasn't enough hours in the day for me to do all these jobs, so the guys had to sort of dig in and help me out. And luckily for me, it kind of did work out. Eventually, the boss came back out, which was good of him. He had a bit of a tan, so I'm not sure what he'd been doing. I think he was lying to me, quite honest. Probably went on holiday. But again, this is sort of the sort of areas we're working in. To cover at this point, on that tour, it was quite a testing time. I actually, unluckily enough, I got blown up twice on that tour. In one of these vehicles, one of them American Humvees there, there was quite a big IED campaign on at the time, and driving through the city, we were out every single night. We worked every single night for 9 months, and I got blown up twice, which I suppose in one way is good odds because it's only twice. But in the same way, I would have quite happily have said I never got blown up at all, to be quite honest with you. But we managed to work through it, and all the guys got out completely unscathed, which was great. But quite a sort of, I think it kind of opened my eyes to the possibility that you can be confident, you can be fit, you can be motivated, you can be trained, and you can think you've got the best sort of kit in the world, but actually things will happen out of your control that you cannot deal with. It's only the aftermath that you can deal with. The unit I was supporting, the unit we were working there with at the time, took quite substantial casualties, and on the periphery of that, we had to go in and we had to sort of help them out by, unfortunately, taking the bodies out. And there was a couple of helicopter accidents that we had to go in and sort of help out with. So it opened my eyes again as a commander to, right, this is what happens when it goes wrong. But we're very lucky that it's gone right for us. So I kind of got the yin and the yang there. And just sort of coming up to the end of this sort of command part, really, about the spirit of leadership. I'm saying there, rank has its privileges. I was promoted to sergeant, and I've got to say that one of the things I'll tell you from Afghan, good or bad, depending on your point of view, you are massively responsible for the guys. When it goes right, you get a massive thumbs up, and you can give that to the blokes. But when it goes wrong, guess what? It's on your shoulders and your shoulders only, unfortunately. But that's the way rank is in the military. Again, with the buck stops with me. I can plan, and I can make the best plan in the world. I can train my guys, I can motivate them, I can do everything you can. Sometimes some things just happen, and when it goes wrong, the buck stops with you. At best, it's a bit of a rollicking, and it's a bit of a one-way conversation with your boss, a cup of tea with no biscuits, or at the very worst, unfortunately, it's casualties on operations, or worse, it's death. And again, like I've said a few times, with no planned survives contact with enemy, we found this out time and time and time again, and that was the one common denominator from every operation I've ever done, was that, we would make these great plans, these great ideas, and my boss would come in, cock of the walk, thinking he was the best thing since sliced bread, saying, hey, we've got it sewn up tighter than a drum, this. And you literally get out the front gate and it's all gone completely wrong, and it just happens. Again, with the proactive and reactive, depending on your point of view, depending on the way that we were being employed on operations, it is great, and it is a great thing to be proactive, but sometimes you can't help it. Your hand is forced to be reactive, and you've got to react to how things happen. And one thing that I've found throughout, it is instilled in the military massively, but for some reason, some of the ranks that you go to, some people aren't as honest as you'd like them to be. They tell you what you want to hear sometimes. But I found that honesty and integrity held me in good stead. Good, bad, or indifferent, I kind of always told the truth, or I did always tell the truth. And, it either went well or it didn't, just one of two things. But no matter what, there was always a positive. Happily, I've got to say, I haven't got everything right in my military career. I've learned more from the bad things than I have from the good things. Everything that's gone wrong, every sort of mistake I've ever made, I've learned 10 times as much as I have from when things go swimmingly well and you're kind of top of the course. You never learn from that. And if anyone wants to sit there and say that everything they've ever done's gone right, well, I'm not so sure about that one, to be quite honest. Okay, so just to sort of finish off on this one, Afghan 2009, I went out as part of the UK contingent to, again, a platoon of 30 guys. And my job on there this time was to work with the Afghans. We had about 50 Afghans with us that we recruited, trained, and we mentored on operations. And because I've done it with the guys in the past, you've got that human element of mentoring people, but then you've got big barriers such as language, and you've got things like religion and the way that people are in their own countries. It's not the way that Duncan Slater does things in the UK, and you've got to fit in with that. That's the way it is. If you're going to go to a country and you're going to try and help them change things, you can't go in and tell them this is how you do it now. It just doesn't work. And actually, on one of the many things that I did learn from the conversations that I had with the guys that we were working with out there was, they would tell you more if you ask a question than it would if you told them something, like, what do you think about this? And they would tell you like from quite a sort of deep angle, considering that, the broad brush that people think, well, most people in Afghan, they're kind of sort of hillbillies to an extent. They've got no internet, they've got nothing. You don't find many stupid people out there, to be quite honest. And so I got 3 months into the tour, and what we were doing was working up in the Helmand Valley in the green zone. That's where all the fighting takes place. And routinely, we would go out for 6 weeks at a time, live in the desert, be resupplied by helicopter or aircraft, and we would just work sort of out in the desert in a safe environment, come into the green zone, try and get as much intelligence as we can, go back, report it up to the sort of higher echelons, and then other units from the army and all the rest of it would come in and act on that intelligence. We worked on a traffic light system, if that makes sense. So green is obviously friendly. Amber means that you could walk or drive into a village and you could speak to them, but either on the way in or the way out, you would be contacted or ambushed. And then red obviously means, danger, they're not friendly. You get within a kilometre of where they were and you get malleted. The sort of big threat out in 2009, or one of the biggest threats out there, was the IEDs, which is obviously what got me. They just seemed to be an influx at the time. Because we were dependent on, this is not a party political broadcast, by the way, for Duncan Slater, sort of to go into what happens out in Afghan, but part of the thing was if you drove through a farmer's fields and caused damage, you would then repay them, recompense either by money or give them fertilizer. They would then sell that fertilizer to the Taliban. The Taliban would turn that fertilizer into a bomb. Technically, we were blowing ourselves up. So, I'm sarcastic if nothing else. Out on operations on this sort of big push in Helmand, in the Helmand Valley, we were driving up a road on a reconnaissance, and in the vehicle that I'm in there, this vehicle here, which is a Jackal, it's a fighting vehicle, as you can see. My vehicle was blown up by an improvised explosive device. So where you see the wheel there, just underneath the wheel, when we were driving over, the device was detonated, and I got the good news in no uncertain terms. So that was my vehicle just after it got blown up. For those of you can see, there's a crater just there. So that vehicle weighs about 8 tonne, and it threw that vehicle down the road a little bit, and that's where I was sitting, and it threw me about 30 foot into a compound. And I think this is where the story of command finishes, And this is where I massively go into the fact that this is where I'm on receive now, and I literally, from this point here, I'm into like a learning curve that, to be quite honest, I never thought I would entertain in my life. It just changed everything for me. I landed in this compound, still in the chair, so you could argue technically it was an ejector seat if you wanted, but I broke my back with a blast. The shockwave of the blast broke my back, and the way that the vehicle came up, it completely smashed my legs. I broke all the ribs in my back, so I found it quite hard to breathe, a bit winded. And then I broke my arm as well, so I couldn't really do much. I had like one arm basically that was working at the time. So I tried to sort myself out as best I can, but you know, again, delegation's a great art, so I kind of needed the guys to square me away big time. I wasn't going to put myself on a stretcher, that's for sure. So the guys called in for a helicopter. I got Casivac'd out of there, and I went to hospital in Bastion, which is the sort of main hospital in Helmand. In there, kind of patchy, to be quite honest. I was on so much ketamine that, you know, I could have flown home, to be quite honest with you. So what they did was they had me flagged as high priority, so they weren't sure whether I was going to live or die. Unfortunately, if your body goes through too much trauma at one time, you know, it can basically just give up. So it's kind of anyone's call. So what they did was they got me back to the UK as soon as possible, and they got me back to the UK as soon as possible. Within 22 hours of being wounded, I was in the UK, and I spent 5 months in hospital. One, I was in intensive care for quite a long time, and two, what they wanted to do was assess the sort of extent of my injuries. I kept my legs in the blast, which, you know, for anyone is a massive plus point. I'll give you that. But you know, they were giving me so much problems that for 5 months I lay in a bed flat and I couldn't do much else. You know, I literally watched as much daytime TV as one person can take in their life. You know, as much Dickinson's Real Deal and Top Gear reruns as you can have. In fact, I've been walking through the hotel valuing stuff as I go. You know, it's terrible, really. But you know, you go through operations and you go through all these things, and you're in the hope all the time. You know, you're at the mercy of the doctors and all the rest of it giving you information. So again, going back to being in a command role, you're being massively reactive. You know, you're reacting to what these guys are saying. They told me initially, you've got broken legs. I thought, well, 6 weeks' time, I'll probably be up and about. I'll probably make it out for the end of the tour, no problem at all. But when they sort of got into the bones of it, literally, they said, like, you know, what you need to realise is your legs from the knee down are completely smashed. You know, your bones don't know what to knit to. They tried to go in there and try and piece it all together with sort of shards of metal and all the rest of it. Wasn't happening. So to sort of basically cover that in one big aspect, when I was coming up to the point of going from hospital to rehabilitation, all right, I'd been through the sort of mixer really, but I was in a ward with other people, so other injured service people that had come back. So the sense of humour in that ward was probably the worst sense of humour you've ever seen in your life. But you know, there's some great wind-ups. But on the other side, you're in there with people that, you know, in the bed beside me, for instance, there was a guy with three limbs missing. So he was missing 2 legs, sort of high up, and he's missing 1 arm. I'm lying in there with a broken back and legs in plaster. I'm not going to start whinging to that guy there. You know, it's just not going to happen. So you learn to sort of temper your moods and temper the way that you're thinking, and actually you end up becoming quite introvert, and you sort of process things a lot more. Rather than being verbal, you process it inside your head. And it can be a bit of a sort of double-edged weapon at times. You know, you can massively bring yourself down, but actually, for me, touch wood, you know, I found quite a lot of inner sort of strength from things that had happened before. I wasn't willing to quit, even though I had a broken back. I wasn't willing to give up on my mobility. I think at the end of 5 months, the doctor that would come round and he did all the operations on me, he was literally at his wit's end with me. Every time he came round, my first question would be, how are my legs? Am I going to get up and running soon? And I was gradually wearing this guy down. You know, you could see, I bet he just absolutely hated coming to see me. And in the end, I was sat with my wife in bed, and I asked him again, you know, what's going to happen? Because I was just about to go off to rehabilitation, so hopefully get going again out of this wheelchair. And I said, Luke, what's going to happen to me? Am I going to get up? Am I running? What's the score? Like, you know, is it London Marathon in 6 months' time, or what? What are we talking here? And he kind of looked at me, and he said, right, you need to listen to me here, and you need to listen, you know, good. and which was difficult because I was deaf in one ear, which is a bonus being married, but we'll leave that again. But you know, kind of, you know, as you do. But so anyway, he said to me, like, you need to realise here, you are never getting out of that wheelchair, and that was his words. You're never getting out of that wheelchair. And he goes, if it happens, if it did happen, you're not going to walk anywhere. You couldn't walk across a car park, and you know that is the extent of you crawling the London Marathon. It's never going to happen. And I'm not going to tell you the language that was in my head, but I just remember thinking, you're wrong. You know, it's not. You can't do that. You can't pigeonhole someone and tell them, you know, the human body is an amazing thing, and it will do amazing things. But for me personally, one, I wasn't receptive to that. You know, going back to Dale's model there, I wasn't having that. No way. Like it's just not going to happen. And two, I thought there's always a way. There's always a way. From all the times that we'd sort of had terrible times in Afghans, and we just managed to get out of it. From the time that we just managed to miss on 100 Taliban fighters coming to basically finish us off when that helicopter went down, you know, it's always possible, and I wasn't giving up on that. That was my thought process, and I've always clung on to that no matter what. So when I went to rehabilitation again, you know, I was in there for a long time, and I spent about a year in a wheelchair, which arguably can be quite a bonus because I can carry a tray with a lot of cups of tea in it. But from a flip side, you know, the world is not wheelchair friendly from the other side, and it's actually quite frustrating to be in a wheelchair. And some people, I totally understand, it's not their choice, they've got to be in a wheelchair. But for me, I didn't see it as this is the future. You know, I thought there's always got to be another way here. After a year, my legs were really deteriorating, and the blood wasn't getting to the bones and all the rest of it, and I couldn't walk, I couldn't do anything. And the doctor gave me a firm choice. Now, that took a year. In that year, my wife had a baby, so I had a 6-month baby, sort of waiting to have a dad that was actually going to get off his backside and do something here, you know. No expectations there. But, you know, I had quite a lot of pressure on me to perform, and it was self-induced pressure. I wanted to be a good dad, I wanted to do all these things, and my goals had massively changed from being in the military, being a sergeant, leading blokes, to actually, I want to be a dad and I want to get out of a wheelchair. What do I have to do to do that? Surgeon gave me two clear choices. You can either sit in a wheelchair and you're just going to remain in quite a lot of pain for, you know, for the rest of your days. He wasn't selling that one to me, to be quite honest. Or he said, you're only 30-year-old, undergo double amputations. Within a few weeks, a couple of months, you'll be up on your legs, you'll be pain-free, and you know, the sky's the limit. So, you know, the guy should be a salesman for prosthetics, really, shouldn't he? But, you know, he totally sold it to me there, to be quite honest with you. So I was like, right, where do I sign? And literally a month later, I was in hospital, underwent double amputations, and I've got to say, in the sort of year that it took to lose those legs, I grew, and it probably sounds a bit strange in some ways, I grew to hate my legs because they caused me nothing but pain. I wasn't being a father, I was being a terrible husband. That hasn't improved, but I was just a terrible human being. I was massively consumed in my own sort of selfish world of, I'm in pain, you know, again what Dale was saying there, well, this is what happens to me, you know, this is my luck, and you're on a massive downer, and when you're on a downer, it's really hard to hit that slope to try and build yourself up again. But for me, it was quite a big thing that happened. Once I went and got rid of those legs, went the old short back and sides, I wasn't in any pain anymore, and I literally wasn't. I went from being in a lot of pain on a lot of morphine every day, you know, to literally no pain. You know, where's my legs? Where do I sign? You know, we're going here. Come on, and it was literally like night and day. And once I sort of started making little gains, I got momentum, and that was it then, you know, and that was my thought process behind it. So just one of the things that I did find was this, and don't get me wrong, I'm no Erwin Rommel here trying to sort of get you guys to jump out the door, but I sort of think that for me, I always find like a little bit of solace in like little sayings and stuff, and I kind of applied little things to myself. I don't know if anyone knows the Theodore Roosevelt, The Man in the Arena. I don't know if anyone knows that, but it's worth looking up. He did a speech a long time ago, and it was about being the man in the arena, and it basically, or woman, sorry, but basically what it capitalizes on is you can be that sort of person in the arena with everyone watching you, and everyone will comment on you, comment on how you're doing, how you're getting on, but it's only you that can measure your own effort, how much you're really putting in and how much you're getting out of it. People will always criticize, but it's down to you just to get on with it and actually get something out of it. And I did find that. So things that did help me through the recovery process was, one, with the two things I wanted to have in life: one, mobility; two, to actually get out of a wheelchair and be a dad, was to be focused at all times. Two, it was very easy to give up. And I don't mean that I could just sort of wave the white flag and say, nah, not today. What I mean is, when you're injured, you're put in this protective bubble. Like anyone here, it's not just about injured soldiers. Anyone, it's someone that's struck down with a terrible illness or whatever. Do you know what? People, the first thing, how are you? You don't have to do that. Don't hurt yourself. Don't do too much. It's easy to do that, but there's got to come a time where that's in the past and you've got to start cracking on again, and you've got to start making gains and finding out, what makes you tick again, and it's important. Aiming high, for me, being told you're in a wheelchair, you're going nowhere, sunshine. I was like, nah, I don't think so. And I was thinking, right, I am going to get out of here. So I had to aim higher than I thought I could do. I wasn't going to stick with someone else's idea of what I could do. I was going to pick my own. Standards, maintaining the highest standard I could. And I think that the sort of one at the bottom there about giving something back, all the treatment I received from civilian healthcare staff, medical sort of civilians, the military side as well, because it was like a sort of mixed ward where you had military and civilian personnel. I had the best care. I don't think I could have had better care, to be quite honest with you. And I felt massively guilty at being 30-year-old lying in a hospital bed for 5 months, having people sort of do what they had to do for me. I was basically like I went from 15 stone when I was injured to 9 stone, so I wasted away in this bed. It was horrible, and it took, the day I got in a wheelchair, it took 2 nurses to sit me up and get me in a wheelchair. And there was a lot of embarrassment on my part. When you've got a nurse helping you go to the bathroom and stuff like that, it's horrible. You lose your dignity massively, and it's a terrible thing to do. So I thought, do you know what, the first opportunity I get, the first chance I get, I'm going to give something back. I'm going to prove that all the times they've come in and done these things for me, maybe they'll remember me, because I'm going to go and do something to prove that I found a way back. And that's what I wanted to do, and it was going to tie it off nicely for me. Selfish in a way, I suppose, but it was my way of sort of giving something back to everyone else. So that's where the South Pole comes in. I was basically shown the door of the military because I couldn't carry on soldiering in 2012. I think the words were, don't let the door hit you on the arse on the way out the building. There was no chance of me staying in, basically. And it was a case of, you're off to Civvy Street, it's a case of finding what you can do. They were looking for volunteers, a military charity called Welcome the Wounded. And they'd done a trip to the North Pole with injured service people, and then what they wanted to do was do something bigger and go to the South Pole, but do a race. So they had 3 teams, not 3 British teams, but a British team, an American team, and a Commonwealth team. So they had a couple Aussies in there and a couple Canadians. And what they wanted to do was show that on operations all over the world, you work together, you get injured together, you fight together. Do you know what? You can do something like this together and show that just because you're injured, just because the bar has been set, out of your reach, you can hit it, and you can do something arguably that someone with all their limbs or all their sort of faculties is going to find hard. And that's what we did. When my wife saw that they were looking for volunteers to go to the South Pole, I think it shows that I've been at home like way too long, because she was like, I really think you should sign up for that. So I was like, thanks for the support, cheers, thanks. But I think that was a measure of how my marriage was going, to be quite honest. So that's what we did. I hit kind of the same sort of problems in going for the South Pole as I did when I was injured, to be quite honest with you. People will look at me as a double amputee, and just as something that people do, people do judge a book by its cover. It happens all the time. I'll be honest, I always get a seat on the underground because no one wants to stand next to me. For some bizarre reason. I'm happy with that, but that's just the way it goes. So people do judge. If you've got everything going there, if you've got all your limbs and all the rest of it, people automatically think, well, what's wrong with you then, when people say you've been injured? But for me, it's very cosmetic, it's very obvious what's happened. But I would argue the case that for me, all I've got to do is click on the old legs, and I'm away. I can walk all day, I can run, I can do whatever you want me to do. I'm not a performing monkey, but I can do whatever what I need to do, what I want to do. The possibilities are just the fact that you've got to think round it rather than think, right, I can't do that because you can do it with your legs, I can't do it. You've just got to think of another route round it. And it's just like being in the military. You just think outside the box. You think of what you've got, how you're going to achieve it, and that's all you can do. And that's what I applied time and time again. So I was the only double amputee that put in for the British team. And there were 300 applicants, so I thought, yeah, I've got like 2 hopes, and Bob Hope's dead, so that's no hope that's left, unfortunately. But when they took me in for the sort of interview that I had, they said, "Do you think you can do it?" And I was like, "Well, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think I could do it. Of course I can do it, but my problem is convincing other people I can do it." So I can have the best sort of thought process in the world, knowing that I can do it. But if people aren't going to believe in me, it's not going to happen. So I had to go through this process of, eventually I was picked to get on the team. But I had to show people time and time again that I was safe. They're taking a massive risk taking you down to Antarctica. So I had to show people I could ski 200 mile and I could do all these different things. So they set us like little goals all the way for a year. So we had to train constantly for a year to get sorted out. And actually, by aiming so high to ski 200 mile, pulling a 90 kilo palk, basically your own body weight, by doing that, I have now sorted myself out for the rest of my life, which probably sounds a bit weird, but by going and skiing 9 hours a day, I can now walk comfortably for a day, no problem at all, because I think, well, if I can ski for 9 hours and I can crack that pulling 90 kilos, I can definitely walk around the shops, although I'm definitely going to whinge to my wife, but and try and get out of it, like throwing a cat in the bath. I'm not happy with it, but I'm going to try and get out of it, but I can do it. And it's just a matter of, again, goal setting and trying to think outside the box. And by doing something up there, you've sorted yourself out massively for life, and it did happen that way. And by the way, that ginger bloke there is Prince Harry. He was on our team. I forgot to mention him, name drop. He, part of the thing was, if you said a bunch of injured soldiers and all the rest of it are going to the South Pole, I think, oh, that's nice. But if you put Prince Harry in it, everyone's going to go, oh, nice one, yeah, we're going to watch that. So that's why they did it. He was the PR guy, he was the sort of head honcho there, and he came with us, and he did the whole expedition with us actually. And a lot of the things that I'd learned in the military about teamwork, team cohesion, basically, your physical standards and sort of honesty and integrity came into play. Being in Antarctica, you're going to a place that nobody goes routinely on a daily basis. It was minus 48 with a wind chill, so it was a pretty chilly old place. I'm from Scotland, so I thought I knew cold, but that was a new cold for me. And you're in a demanding atmosphere, and I would put it to you that even someone like Prince Harry, with all his limbs, with seemingly no problems, he's going through the same problems as me. Just because I've got no legs, doesn't mean I find it easier or harder than him, and we're both thinking our own way around all these little problems. And for me, actually, it's a total bonus, because we're in like little 2-man tents. Unclip my legs and take them off outside the tent, I can literally run around that tent. It's a piece of cake. For these guys, they've got to shoehorn themselves in there, so I had loads of space, and I had 2 pillows as well everywhere I went, so easy. It's just your thought process, isn't it? If you're willing to sort of make light of it and think, well, what is the plus here? What's the upside? Do you know what? You forget about the dark side. That was us on a daily basis. I could tell you that to anyone, but that is me. Sensory deprivation for 200 miles, basically. We'd ski 200 miles, so 9 hours a day, and you'd have to be in those sort of climates. You've got to be covered up at all times. So what I would say was, what I used the South Pole for was a really cathartic process. I thought about a lot of things that had happened to me since 2009, the way that I'd sort of done things, reacted to things, and the way that I was going around my, if you want to call it, disability, the way that I was now perceived, and more importantly, the way I perceived myself. Because I think until I got to the South Pole, I looked at myself as Duncan Slater, the ex-military bloke who is now disabled. And it wasn't a case of that. Once I thought about it long and hard enough, I thought, well, could a disabled person ski 200 mile? Probably not. it's not that you're disabled, it's just that you're enabled in another way. And I'm not trying to like sort of say that, do you know what, not every person that says you're disabled isn't. It's nothing like that. But my own perception of myself was kind of a limiting factor in my life until I got picked for this team. And once I'd done sort of 9 hours a day, if you like, I got to the end and I was like massively zen, you know, I was like totally at peace with myself, believe it or not. And one thing that I hadn't really mentioned was I suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder with kind of what had happened. And that had been a massive stumbling block for me, you know, a huge sort of thing. You look at every day in a massive grey light, you know, you never see the positive in anything, you see the downside and everything. So again, when I was picked for this, what I wanted to do was, if you think of the last bad thing that had happened to me in my life was getting blown up, you know, that was a bad thing to happen, and that's what my PTSD was based on. So what I thought was, do you know what, if I replace that with a massive positive, it can only be good. Hopefully it might cancel out the sort of negative. So when I got to the South Pole, believe it or not, you know, I hate to say it, but it did work for me. I'm not saying it would work for everyone, but it worked for me. And I now look back and think, well, what have I done since I've been injured? You know, I don't think of 2009 getting blown up and cartwheeling through the air, you know, but what I think about is, hey, do you know what? I did 200 miles at the South Pole. Not many people have done that one, have they? And I sort of think of it as a massive plus point. And I think, well, right, what now? And one of the good things I've got to say is there's a lot of PR around all this sort of stuff. And if you didn't watch the documentary, thanks very much for your support. But, you know, and if you did, thanks for your support. But, you know, what I would say was, the first thing that any reporter would ask us when we came back wasn't, how's your legs? How are you? You know, how are you getting on and all this sort of stuff. It was, so what do you think's next for you then? And it was, you were back on that even keel, if you like, if that makes sense to anyone here. You were almost, you could see the shadow of your former self back a little bit. And from a very personal point of view, just to finish off, my wife said that when I came back from Antarctica, I don't recognise you, who the hell are you? No, she didn't say that. But what she said was, you know, you've got your old self back again. You know, it's almost like you've got your own mojo back a little bit that you had when you're in the military, because every day is different. You're achieving things all the time. And I didn't have that when I got out. I didn't have that when I was going through the recovery process. But when I went through this, you know, that's what gave me it back. And I put that down to my military experience, and I put that down to the way I was treated and the sort of the things that I did in the military, you know, and I don't look at it as a bad thing at all. You know, sometimes in the past I have done. I thought, well, it was a waste of 14 years of my life. But now, more than ever, I think this is where I should be now. You know, I should be this double amputee that's going to do this, that and the other, and I'm quite at ease with it all. And I think, do you know what, it wasn't all that bad, actually. You know, it really wasn't. And it's just a matter of changing my goals, changing my thought process and embracing change. That's really all it was, just a case of thinking, right, do you know what, this has happened. On paper it's bad, but actually when you're going through it, the amount of help and support I had, you know, no man's an island, you need help and support. I got that and I made gains, and I went on to do something that, in my humble opinion, was second to none. It was absolutely brilliant. So that's basically it. And that was the 3 guys left standing. Only joking. But, just as one final thing, I'll just quickly tell you, there was an American guy, for those that didn't watch the documentary, cheers. There was an American guy that was blind, completely blind. Not that you can be half blind, but like he was completely blind. Ivan, his name was. The only Puerto Rican ever to go somewhere that was minus temperatures. He hated the cold. It was hilarious. And we get to the point where we're about 10 kilometres away from the South Pole, and because they were filming it, they wanted to look great for the cameras, and they had us in a line, and it looked really cheesy and all that, and we thought, this is horrendous. And what they did was, they said, right, Ivan wanted me to lead him. Because he's blind, you can't just ski off, because you'd find him in the Azores or something, or you'd never know where the hell he went. So what we did was, they would connect them up with 2 metal poles on his hips, and the guy in front would connect them to his sledge that he was pulling, and he could feel the sort of dips and all the rest of it at the ground, change direction. It was amazing to watch. So what they did was, on the last day, Ivan wanted me to lead him, so I thought, cheers mate. But so they connected me up to him, and off we went. And you live in an iPod for 9 hours a day. you've got a lot of music going on for 9 hours, you know, Cliff Richard, Michael Bublé, whatever you want to listen to. And so off we went, and because it was the last day, you can see the South Pole, we think, right, let's just go for it. And we kind of thought everyone was there, and off we went. And I had this tapping on my arm a couple hours in, and we're literally on the cusp of getting to the South Pole, so we thought, we're right there. And I thought, here we go, we've got a cheesy photo or something before we get there. And it was one of the guides saying, look, you need to stop here, guys, you know, you guys are like miles and miles in front of everyone else, you know, you've left them for dead, you need to wait here, we all need to get there as a winner to make it look good for the camera and all this sort of thing. So while I was sort of listening to him, I was taking my iPod out while he was saying all this. I looked back to Ivan, I thought, I better tell Ivan. I didn't realise the guide had told him already. So he's pulling out his iPod, and he goes, "Hey Dunk, did you hear that, did you?" And I was like, "What?" He goes, "The blind guy and the guy with no legs, we're winning here." And I was like, "Oh, you're bloody right, mate. Yeah, nice one. We're not stopping now like this. We stuck in and we like shot off to get there like this. So if anyone tells you that we didn't win, they're lying, right? So we got there first, I'll tell you that. But that's basically it in a nutshell. And I think it's probably time for questions and all that. So cheers."